Good morning to you all, and welcome to our sixth session of this symposium, Sports, Politics and Society, organized by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. And the papers presented here will be published in Siyasat Arabiya and Imran journals. It's my pleasure to welcome Ali Semmouk and Hichem Saouli, Wadia, Jehouani and Aissa Ghayyati. The session is entitled Sports and Social Movements, the Ultras in the Arab Maghreb countries. It's a continuation of the previous session in the morning, and we took the organizational consideration more than a thematic one. The previous session dealt with the violence aspect, so therefore we should not link it with the ultras always. The first paper will be Mr. Ali Semmouk and Hichem Saouli, and it's entitled The Structure of Violence in Algeria's Socio-Athletics. Dr. Ali Semmouk is a professor of sociology in the Baji Mukhtar University, and he focuses on violence in Algerian society and the sociology of crime, and he has many publications to his name, mainly the phenomena of the study of violence in Algerian society, the clash of identities, the phenomenon of tax evasion. Dr. Hichem Saouli he is from Akli Al Hajj University in Bouira, and the latest publication to his name is a joint study with Dr. Ali Semmouk entitled The Phenomena of Tax Evasion as a Sociological Problem Towards a Critical Approach, which was published in 2021. Welcome both of you, Ali Semmouk and Hichem Saouli. You have the floor now. You have 20 minutes. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, first of all. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Hichem Saouli, our thanks to your esteemed institute, the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, for your kind invitation to attend the activities of this symposium, which took the title as part of the themes, the problem of violence in the field of sports. I consider this as part and parcel of the current status quo in the Arab world, which really spoils the joy of watching football matches and attending the matches, and also disturbing law and order emanating from this understanding. We started our research process in which we discuss the structure of violence in Algeria's socio-athletics and the sphere of socio-archaeological approach to football, And we should first of all acknowledge the limited time we are allocated for this presentation, which forces me to bypass many of the issues relating to the theoretical and epistemological and methodological aspects of the theme of this paper, and consequently I will focus on the most important conclusions of our work, with an invitation to you all to look at the paper and spend some time to go through the details, and we thank you in advance for doing so. Therefore, we have determined for this attempt an epistemological strategic aim, and we try through achieving that to intersect with other quantitative approaches of the phenomena of violence in Algeria, socio-athletics, which was anchored in many stereotypes, which more often than not repeat the same thing based on absolutes and justifications of the empirical research, without turning attention to alternatives, methodological and theoretical alternatives, which can achieve the real understanding of this phenomena and the hidden aspects of it, the hidden context of it. When we've finished this project from both theoretical and practical aspects, we presented the final conclusions in a report divided into 7 sections, but I don't have time to go through them, so I'll move directly to the 4th pillar or theme, which we allocated, devoted to the problem of understanding and appreciation of this phenomena, because this problem has amounted to phenomena and aspects which made the violence in Algerian socio-athletics in general and Algerian football in particular manifests itself in this violence. After finishing the theoretical and epistemological aspects of that, we can say that the phenomenon of violence, socio-athletics, violence in Algeria, more often than not repeats itself and reproduces the same discourse. By that we mean that the society in Algeria is divided into groups of people suffering from prejudice and tendency to violence, etc. The other aspect, of course, the other point of view is based on trying to understand this phenomena using a different approach, an approach based on a number of intellectual activities, on the archaeological content of sociology, and to what extent are we able to delve deeply as an epistemological choice and a methodological choice to understand the phenomena of violence in Algeria and in socio-athletics and in football in particular. For this context, we have chosen our understanding to be a form of automatic and direct way of understanding derived from a number of interactions which take place in the sports field in Algeria, and the game of football as an example of that. In addition to this, our choice, epistemological choice, was based on the outcomes of the archaeological discussion which took place between Jean-Claude Gardin and Jean-Claude Passon, and Passeron won with a paradigm, and the paradigm we chose as a way of guiding us in our attempt, which is based that what is there is social structures based on the schools of thought interpretations by individuals through their interactions, whereby the meanings attached to these practices and actions and deeds, and therefore we chose not to stop at the social ideas that the empirical research defends only, and to consolidate our same methodological approach. We found the Michel Foucault paradigm, which is a call to tackle the values upon which the justificational empirical school of thought is based on. In the same epistemological context, we found that the opposite paradigm, which says that rationality could not cancel out which was not irrational from the human existence, despite the efforts made in this direction. And in accordance with the strategic archaeological as basis, we tried, based on the Arconian principles, therefore we determined for this work, we started digging into the following significances. First of all, the nature of violence in football as an example, and the significance of violent socio-athletic actions and the motives behind it. Thirdly, the nature of the forces which engage in this violence and their place in the social ranking. And fourthly, the significance of this violence on sport itself. Number 5, the degree to which the individuals who engage in this violence are organized. And for the sake of time, I will not go through some other epistemological and contextual aspect of the study and move directly to the conclusions, in the hope of presenting conclusions accordingly. Therefore, I find myself forced to jump over the procedural, epistemological, methodological pillars and to go directly to the fourth aspect, and that is the act of violence as an act of protest, because we wanted this element to be studied carefully to give us an entry point into understanding the action of protest when it goes beyond the standard aspect and how it turns into an act of socio-athletic violence and takes over. As for our concept of understanding, it's based on understanding the socio-athletic violence is aimed at disturbing the act of enjoying normal sporting activities, which can turn into an act of or an assault on other people's physically and on their properties or verbally. This violence or rioting can manifest itself both in the event of the team winning or losing, and this indicates the degree of suppression and the ability to protest and rebel against the establishment. Sometimes this can spill over outside the stadium itself, and if we want to use an approach to reach an understanding grounded in the mechanisms of expansion due to social context which can incite this sort of thing, every time the team loses is a reflection of the feeling of hopelessness, which can lead to acts of violence, an act of desperation which can lead into violence. The discourse in the Algerian football stadiums, which is linked to the social world of the spectators themselves, goes beyond what is sport and allows to reveal the points of defect in the policies followed in the public sphere and the running of the affairs of the country, and this merits more analysis to understand the kind of hegemony practiced and imposed by the authorities. The act of protestation is a political reaction which expresses collective feelings and reflects a reality which contains a lot of complex, intertwined issues which erupts in the right historical moment, like the moment of defeat, which is highly tense, which can lead to losing control on oneself and a tendency to collective violence, acts of collective violence, especially in the absence of individual self-awareness and when large crowds of people are gathered together in the stadiums, and this can be turned into a way of releasing all these tensions and pressures that, rather than turned into structured political action. Sometimes the chanting we hear reflects, even if partially, that when you see that their symbolism is threatened. Therefore, now when you look at the spectators' rows and the thousands of people, when there is an attempt to control them so that the crowds do not turn into into a political organization, structured political organization, which seeks to reconsider not only the sporting side but can turn into an action, a movement to turn the political game itself in the Algerian society. For example, football stadiums are provided with all sorts of monitoring, even electronic ones. The aim behind this is not just to combat classical acts of movement. It goes beyond that to avoid any ability in the crowns to organize themselves politically using football stadiums as a departure point. I will move directly to the fifth element, and that is socio-athletic violence and the social background. As you may know, the phenomena of violence in Algeria is closely linked to a number of contradictions and defects which are present in the socio-economic and political structures of the society. We cannot disconnect the phenomena of violence from the social structure. We can describe the practice of violence as a result of the social vulnerability which prevails politically and economically in the country. Therefore, we can say that sports is a facade of society which reflects the problems experienced by this society and expresses the crises where competition is noticed from a civil point of view and a social point of view. Excuse me. When we look at the spectators and analyze their discourse, we will see it's a reflection of tension, trouble, and conflicts, whether tribal or social or other aspects of allegiance. What added to this tension is the lack of recognition of the states. Sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Ali. Your time is almost over. If you please conclude. Unfortunately, I find myself now. I will move directly to the seventh element, and that is the referee of the match and the aspects of oppression. If we study this phenomena using the epistemological and procedural tools to deconstruct the aspects of non-recognition and tendency to violence which manifests itself in symbolic, verbal or physical violence towards the political actors in the country and the projectionist of that on the referee of the match as a representative of the authority in the field. The practices by the referee in a football match requires us to look at it as something that reminds people of the concept of a referee as representing the authority or the ruler in behaving in a way which lacks integrity and efficiency, and it's oppressive and over using the powers and abusing the powers and acting as a dominant force. And therefore, in order to reach the understanding, we must first appreciate the socio-engineering equations and the structural makeup of the Algerian society. Then the real meanings of the hidden contexts will reveal themselves, of the acts of violence practiced in the field of football in Algeria, which is practiced by the groups of spectators who really now try to stand up against the referee, and all sorts of verbal abuse and all the acts of protest against the referee are used by the groups of supporters to express their disappointment when they consider that the referee was not act fairly and did not respect the rules of the game. And the marginalized people then directing them towards acts from feeling marginalized socially and the field of sport to a political consideration and protesting against all forms of the authority. More often than not, the resultant of all of this will be the resultant of these interactions on the margins of the football pitch, which are linked to the social aspect of the spectators, and making this kind of ill behavior, ill-conceived behaviors, link with oppressive practices by the tools of the groups which control society. So therefore, with the passage of time, these feelings of protest now move towards an interaction between what is social and what is political, taking forms of revolutionary expressions against all the symbols of the state and authority and the tools at its disposal, and therefore there will be an attempt to destroy them materially and morally, and there will be declarations of acts of non-recognition of this authority and its manifestations. And in the economic field, the sport of football. I apologize, Dr. Ali, again for interrupting you. Maybe we should leave the rest of your paper for the periods of questions and answers. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ali Semmouk, and thank you to Mr. Hichem Saouli for their joint effort. Unfortunately, Dr. Ali Semmouk did not have enough time to present all his findings, and we hope that we can resume our discussion with him, especially the economic aspect where didn't have time to talk to. Now we move directly to our second paper, and it is a joint paper between Mr. Wadia Jehouani and Aissa Ghayyati. It's entitled Ultras Graffiti and the Constructing of Fan Identity, a sociological study of symbolic ownership in the city of Tetuan. Dr. Wadia Jehouani is a professor of anthropology in Tetuan, and he holds his PhD from the University of Al-Qadi Ayad in Marrakesh, and his research interests focus on the organizational sociology and digital society. And in Morocco, he wrote about environmental issues at the core of sociology towards contemporary sociological trends. Also, Mr. Aissa Ghayyati has jointly written this paper, and he's from Tetuan University. He holds an MA in sociology, and he studies the fans, the ultra fans, also in his city and elsewhere in Morocco. We start with Dr. Wadi, and now you have 20 minutes. Good morning to you all, and I'm very happy to be with you in this symposium. It's a very important theme indeed to discuss sports, politics, and society. We thank all the organizers. In fact, myself and Mr. Aissa, we decided to talk about graffiti and constructing fan identity through the Tetuan football team. We will be discussing the question of sociological study of symbolic ownership in Tetuan. We'll divide the paper into two parts. I'll talk about the theoretical aspect, and my colleague will talk about the conclusions. The ultras and the phenomena of football fans is relatively new to Arab society compared to European societies and Latin American societies. Also, the sociological interest and in the field of sociology is due to acts of protest, rioting and violence, political participation, and the strong influence of these protest movements through the acts of rioting in football stadiums and outside them. There are many studies. Dominic Buddha's study is very well known in this field. Also, the ultras or fan movements represent also the marginalized sections of society, and it enables them to be prominent and to have an influence in the public sphere or in the field of sport and stadiums. There are many papers and research papers alluding to this and how the ultras attract the marginalized, the excluded people, Abdul Hamid Burqiya, Saeed bin Nis, Gene Hawks, and the list is long. Also, recently, in the second part or the first decade of the new millennium, the interest in this phenomena became apparent because of the waves of violence against the authority, and in the second decade because of the Arab Spring events. This is what we'll try and focus on. This is a very important theme, and it intersects with other fields in the social sciences and sociology in particular, whether the sociology of protest or sociology of violence, psychology of violence, etc. We found many important publications in the literature. It talks about the ultras, but do not allude to the question of ownership. This is the new aspect that we worked on. The first study we found is by Abdurrahim Burqiya, who confirms that the ultras enable the marginalized and the excluded to find a framework to belong or to prove their identity, construct their identity. Also, Flora Maud study, who considers that the action by these fans is not to go to the stadium to support their team, but it provides them with a mentality them and an ability to prove their loyalty and allegiance when during engagements with the authority. Also, other studies we took, Birajer Gillox's study, which goes in the direction of the sociology of movements and social movements, and Gillox says that this world, the world of ultras, is a complex world, and its actions goes beyond the realm of sport to cover economic, political, and social issues too. So therefore, in the framework of the sociology, Pascal Coutauson's study and his team say that now the fans are now moving towards expressing the ability or the willingness to belong and ownership, and use graffiti outside the stadium and chanting inside the stadium. So therefore they are aware of the struggle between them and the authority and the public sphere and other different identities. Saeed bin Nis's study in 2019 says that the discourse by the ultras is no longer linked to a certain territory. It goes beyond borders, like, for example, supporting the issue of Palestine, Palestinian cause, and other Arab causes. Other important studies are the study by Dahman Mustafa and Salim in 2018, which concluded by saying that The ultras culture is a culture based on belonging and supporting the team and the group of fans. This study did not allude to other aspects like ownership or national causes or whatever. Also, there are other research like Richard Jenkins. In conclusion, we say that there is a number of research papers, Burqiya, Flausen, and others talk about identity. Others talk about the cultural aspects and supporting the team, etc. Others focus on belonging and the aspect of awareness and belonging, like Bernice and Genox's. What is strange is all these studies, we did not find any of them talking about proving the identity through ownership. Our study aims at develop Genox Brange's work, which focused on utilizing symbols and marks and posters, etc., as a space for social interaction. This study also tries to find a relationship between this space, and this is what Martina Love tried to talk about. Spacing and synthesis. And we must also remember what John Revie, who sees that the space here has material and symbolic connotation. The study would rely heavily on Richard Jenkins's approach, which will talk about the dichotomy of the internal aspect of the identity and the external aspect, and the way others look at each group of fans. And this is the bottom line, this is the point of strength in this study. We will try to pay attention to these two papers or studies and develop their concepts. Vincent Richamber, Ali for Press, and these two concepts will be framing our paper and will be the entry point to understanding how the ultras groups use graffiti. The problem we depart from here of graffiti is to build the identity of Al Maghreb team in Tetuan. Methodologically, we employed the approach of observation, analysis of the content. I'll be very quick now. Then we did a survey of all the graffiti. 455 photographs were taken of graffitis and used them to map the use of and through Google Map we tried to map them according to the different parts of the city, and also we chose we used the snowball effect and We also, of course, informed the participants of the nature and we asked their consent. We had a number of leaders of Ultras Tatuan, Ultras Los Matadores and Ultras Samper Palorma, and we use the RGIS application, and the survey took place between 2021 May 2022 and August 2022. And now I apologize for going too quickly. Now I give the floor to my colleague, Mr. Ghayyati. Thank you. And thank you to Mr. Morad and all the colleagues. So far as the conclusions are concerned, we can say that the graffiti in the city of Tetuan is divided into two sections. When we look at the map, like Mr. Wadia said, this map is the result of our moves between the different districts and taking photographs. Every time we took a picture, we mapped it according to Google My Maps, and also through the ArcGIS application, we ended up with this map. The blue points are simply Palorma of the Maghreb Tetuani team. The red dots represent Sparta and Persia supporters and the Matadores supporters. We also, and sometimes we found images which are done jointly. We did not find any graffiti from belonging to outside groups except for 4, because this period coincided with the medical emergency of COVID-19, so there wasn't much of movement. From the distribution, we see that the city is divided. In the western side is for the one group, and the eastern part is the other group, Sempre Paran. As for the number of graffiti images, they are almost matching. There isn't a difference in the numbers. Total of 455 graffiti image. The Ultras had 51%, and Ultra Simple Paloma had 49%. We wondered about the nature of this division, why the Ultras Matadores take the western side and the other team in the eastern side. We discovered that the founding fathers belong to these, of each group belong to these districts, and the vast majority told us that their followers used to follow their leaders. In other words, the social allegiance here, or the other way around, the geographical allegiance determines the social allegiance, and so on and so forth. Generally speaking, sometimes we find that the graffiti goes beyond this division lines. Like, for example, the graffiti belonging to one group crosses over to the other side, because these spaces are places of conflict and they have some sort of symbolic ownership of them. I would also like to talk about the nature of this graffiti. We notice that they are located close to each other. For example, at the entrance to a neighborhood, we see that one graffiti attracts, and if there's graffiti on one wall, you'll almost feel close by another graffiti belonging to another group.
So this is a cumulative distribution, and here you can see clear photos. And among the results that, or the outcomes of this study, is that graffiti is this. We're talking about wall paintings, and we are not only talking about a material structure but also a social structure and expressing the relationship between the individual, the group, and other competing groups, even the authority. Another result when we talk about the what's inside and what's outside as determining this aspect, we notice that the graffiti practices here of the team, we can see some sort of symbolic ownership of this space, and they enter in symbolic struggles and confrontations between them and other groups. So it's we have the aspect of the confrontation with outside groups. You have the ultras meeting together in a unified way to face the outside threat. Anthropological studies contributed in understanding the outside, the external threat, and how it contributes to the unity. Here you can see the groups united in order to get the upper hand against the groups belonging to other cities. So we see, for instance, in this clear drawing that even the location where the ultras are, so it's called the Mujahideen. So they are considering themselves the sons of Mujahideens who fought the Spanish colonialism. So they are carrying the torch after the ancestors. So this reflects the noble goals, the human dignity. Their main objective is not only to support their teams but also continuing and following in the steps of their grandparents and their ancestors. Also, we would like to mention that what's inside is not always unified. Even within a city, we have different groups, competing groups, and we see even the ultras of this team in Morocco are competing many times against each other, even though they encourage the same or they support the same team. So we notice that every group presents itself as controllers of this city or this neighborhood. So here we can talking about belonging, identity, and excluding the other. Here, based on the graffitis as well, we notice that this struggle or conflict takes a strong turn when each group tries to bar the graffiti of another group. So each ultra group has specific strategies when they try to execute this or carry out this operation. They usually do it late in the night. They wear face masks in order to not to be identified. I would like to go straight away to talk about graffiti as a group ritual. Please, you have 2 minutes. Thank you. So, the ultras graffiti is considered a ritual as it is a repeated practice and it requires the support and the collaboration and concerted effort of a certain group. And there is an agreement about the name of the graffiti and choosing the right location. The symbolic aspect actually represents the identity of a certain group, and also you have the artistic aspect of it, allowing the graffiti to draw new members. As a general conclusion, we can say that the identity of the ultras is built on the interaction with competing ultras groups, and there is a struggle when it comes to dominance. And we can talk about the special aspects that this group has against the other, and this gives the ultras the legitimacy and social recognition. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wadia, thank you, Wadia Jehouani and Aissa Ghayyati, and also Dr. Ali Semmouk and Mr. Hichem Saouli for the first lecture. Of course, these two lectures triggered several questions and comments. Before giving you the floor, Mr. Wadia, or Mr. Aissa and Wadia. So you have talked about the writings of the ultras, and I thought that I had thought initially that the graffiti is about drawings that use the writings. And maybe he can answer us because he is the expert. And the second question is regarding the motivation. What motives do they have? So, Siempre Paloma and Los Matadores. So they try to own the space. Are we talking about a social struggle? Are we talking about neighborhood fights? And was it studied within the stadia when the Moroccan team faces other teams? So, what can you tell us about these disagreements between the ultras? We will start with Dr. Haider Saeed. Thank you so much, Dr. Morad, and I would like to thank you for your papers. I have a very short comment regarding the paper of Wadia and Aissa. I would like to thank them for this great effort. In order not just to be analyzing any rhetoric, I would have liked to focus about the sports aspect of any rhetoric. So we are talking about rhetoric that we can see everywhere, and this might need, before entering the specificities of this rhetoric. So why the ultras and the Tatwani club needed this graffiti phenomenon. Maybe we need to set a comparison between this pattern and other patterns carried out by other social groups, not necessarily the fans. I agree with Dr. Morad during the presentation. I can say that it included an excess of literature. However, dealing with the rhetoric as a material event, and this idea actually was mentioned in the 60s. The medium is the message. That was the clear slogan. So we cannot separate between the message itself and the medium. So we are not talking about a transparent medium. The medium is part of the message. Therefore, analyzing the rhetoric of the graffitis Tatwani of Maghreb Tatwani based on this point is very important. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Haider, Mr. Abdul Musa. Thank you, Dr. Murad, and I would like to thank dear colleagues for this very interesting presentation. Regarding the question, it is addressed to Dr. Murad, and I think that this paper is trying to bring together the visual artistic aspect and the issues relating to the identity of a group, be it a social movement or a denomination, to include the ultras groups. So I do not want to be lengthy and I do not want to be redundant, and I think that it is very high quality research. However, I would like to talk about the necessity to clarify the meaning of these drawings. So we're talking about the repertoire of actions. We're not talking about individual separate acts. We are talking about several acts and actions, and they are all relating to whatever any group does in order to represent itself. These things need to be translated in such researches by mentioning the visual aspect and the analytical aspect. So, to what extent do they want to get to in the identities? So, the tifos that we see, the huge drawings, the tifos of the spectators, and the showmanship that they do, and the sentences that they use. All these things are intertwined, be it inside the stadia or on the wall. So I would like to see the link between these aspects. Last but not least, we are talking about visual art. So any artistic analysis could be very valuable when it comes to the elements that are used and the symbolism of these drawings, in addition to what Dr. Haider mentioned. So, trying to understand the use of these visual aspects in sports mobilization and forming a social sports event. Thank you, Mr. Abdo. And based on the two comments, so as to the meanings of the graffitis, of course, we need to take into account the political aspects of the graffiti, and it was very rightly presented by Mr. Aissa. They talked about mujahideen, and he linked it with the colonialism. We need to remember that Tetouan is the biggest area or biggest city that fed the terrorist ISIS organization with the combatants. So maybe there are other aspects that can be used to explain them. Please remind us of your name. Assalamu alaikum. Hichem Kamwouli from FSB Maghreb. I liked the graffiti and the presentation this way. Mr. Jehouani talked about a series of terminologies and even the visual aspect of sports and ultras. However, the key concept is the graffiti concept. And here I would like to mention a very important book for the Moroccan sociologist Ahmad Sharrak. I think he laid the foundation of this field, the graffiti, the Arabic graffiti, an introduction in the sociology of revolution and margin. I think this book is a founding book because it went beyond the description and ethnography just to describe what's on the walls, the photos. We are talking about a translation of the meaning and giving these writings a meaning that is beyond description. So we know the description aspect, we know that they are there, but we would like to understand the meaning of this rhetoric. So I would like to talk about something very important. The graffiti are from Spanish language. Does it not mean that Tetuan is close to Spain? And it's also known to be close to the football of Spain. Thank you. Actually, the graffiti is the topic of the coming lecture. It is a very interesting lecture, but let us not forget also Dr. Ali Semmouk regarding violence in the Algerian society. Mr. Karim. Abdulrahim Al Gharib, I would like to thank you all for your valuable presentations. You worked on proving identity by owning the space. I would like to refer you to an important research by Maryam Hissou, a young woman, entitled Collective Identity Through the Ultras Belonging, Raja and Widad as two examples. And among the things that drew my attention in this work was that the researcher asked the fans to determine the priority and suggested God, the nation, the parents, the ultras. So the ultras actually were at the top before the nation, before God, and if it shows something, it shows the crazy belonging, this love by the members of the ultras that they have. Also, the researchers also worked. Christian Bromberger, the anthropologist, worked on the stadium, and his works can only contribute to the analysis of the phenomenon of belonging and identity. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Mahfoud Amara. Maybe or can help us by talking about the aspect of violence in Algeria. Yes, indeed. When we analyze the violence in Algeria, particularly in the sports and football, we should take into account the masculinity idea and the sociology in Algeria. So, how does sociology perceive the way the masculinity is used in the stadia and the idea of violence and how it is expressed in the stadia and football stadia reflects also this idea of masculinity in order to give some sort of credibility to the fans of football by reshaping the idea of masculinity that might be absent in other fields and domains. The second question regarding graffiti, I noticed particularly in Algeria that there has some sort of movement of graffiti types between football and maybe the rap songs, and also the use sometimes of faces of popular folk music in Algeria and actually bringing them to the football world. So there is a competition as to who represents more the different teams. So it is very important for me to understand this movement from one space to another. Thank you, Dr. Mahfoud. Indeed, they are strongly intertwined. So social media is also some of the domains that authoritarian regimes still have to control. Sir, thank you. Kaistria, my question is relating to the intervention of my colleagues Wadia and Aissa. The graffiti and the drawings are part of the conflict, as you have rightfully mentioned. In Tunisia, we can see this confrontation by Xing the name of the previous ultra group and using bigger writing and a different color to write over it. So my question is, these forms of conflict, do they exist in Tatuan? So unfortunately, we will have the last two interventions because we ran out of time. Thank you. My question is regarding the protest. So in the lecture, you mentioned that this is a reflection of the political oppression and censorship is actually preventing a confrontation with the authority. There was also mentioning of some sort of an expression of social contradictions. But on the other hand, the meanings or how many protests were used in order to reach these conclusions. So the research mentioned a number of points, but I could not reach this conclusion based on the evidence that was presented. In the second presentation, we went through drawings, maybe because the language was not clear to us, but I could not get the meaning in between the lines, except for this competition for the ownership of the place. Thank you, Mr. Saif al-Islam Eid. Thank you. Just to be short and brief, my question is to Dr. Aissa. When it comes to the ultras, to what extent can we describe them as activists, as social groups? Because they do not fall into many categories of the social groups. So, if we talk about the tournaments, for instance, uh, it is linked with their presence within the stadium. As to their movement outside of the stadium, uh, this is based on their movement outside of the stadium, and all the expressions are linked with the sphere which is the stadium. Two, is there a perspective in your research that links between the shutting down of the public sphere uh, and the fact that they do not have any place to express their minds, especially that we're talking about teenagers until the age of 25, so they will be able to attend these activities, and to what extent can we consider them different than other groups? So, what separates or distinguishes the ultras, the football ultras, from the fans of an artist or an idea? And all sets of the activism in the Arab world are spreading. Thank you, Mr. Saif. So actually, in reality, we had hoped to have a paper about the most important ultras experiment in the Arab world, which is Al Ahli ultras. We hope in the future to be able to do so. We start with Dr. Ali Semmouk to comment. Sir, Dr. Ali, the floor is yours. So, in the interventions of our dear colleagues, there were questions regarding the potential explanations of this phenomena as being reflective of masculinity in Arab stadia and Algerian football. And very easily we can go back to history, and history shows us that it is mainly male-dominated game. However, some remarks is that we cannot actually highlight the relative aspects in the fields or in the stadia, taking into account the toughness of this sports sphere. So basically, females cannot be present in football stadia except for some of the games where the results or the result of the game cannot be transformed into different aspects other than the aspect of watching the game. However, the relative aspect remains at the level of the household. Within a household, we can find some mothers, some sisters, some wives sharing the same idea that is supportive of other male family members, or they can have a different opinion, and some wives and some sisters, some female supporters could be subject to domestic violence just because they support a team that is different than the team supported by the brother, the husband. So this is some aspects that have yet to reach the sphere of research, but we are starting to see forms of these aspects, and we need more research, and it could become a problematic issue when it comes to future researchers. I also noticed some sort of concern regarding the relation between violence in sports and protests. Of course, this link is there because in the absence of expression medium to voice the political and economic and identity concerns, stadia remain the only sphere or platform or space to express this opposition and protest the practices and policies, particularly taking into account the fact that the authority and the corrupt symbols of the authority are not popular. And it is clear in Algeria, several Algerian officials during football games are insulted, are subject to all sort of condemnation and rejection of their authority and people who appointed them. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ali Semmouk. We return to Mr. Wadia and Mr. Aissa. Please be brief as much as possible. We had many questions and comments, but we will not have enough time to answer them all. Please be brief. Mr. Aissa, thank you so much for all your interventions, for your valuable interventions, and they will undoubtedly enrich this paper. I hope to have enough time. Actually, we do not have enough time, so please be brief. I can say, based on graffiti, we are not only talking about drawings or writings, we can talk about symbols. We are talking about a tag graffiti, so a tag that is just a symbol, and then a piece that could represent a drawing with words and also symbols or slogans that are trying to convey a specific mission or message. As to the rhetoric of the graffiti, we took it into account as a tag that has a dual dimension, the symbolism and the meaning. So, in our ethnographic research, we wanted to understand the meaning that the members of the ultras give to these graffitis. This is why we did not focus much on the rhetoric, because we are talking about the voice, the message, and not listening to the person who's behind this message. So we try to understand the motives behind them writing these words. And here we can talk about a social practice, because in general they are talking about competition between the ultras, and this drives them to use this form of expression. So the graffiti is a resource, is a symbolic capital that legitimizes the symbolic ownership of the place. When it comes to the ultras movement outside the stadia, the paper focuses on the ultras outside the stadia. We did not talk about the ultras inside the stadia. The previous paper highlighted this aspect. We talked about this specific aspect because we are taking into account the writings that belong to the field or to the sphere of sociology in general. We can say that the identity of the ultras, when we talk about identities, we do not mean the homogeneous identity that encompasses all members of the society. We are talking about smaller identities with a certain age category, especially that most of the ultras are young men. So their belonging to the ultras could lead us to distinguishing between very important belonging. So an ultras group highlighting this belonging and a limited belonging, like a partial belonging to an ultras group in parallel with other work and education. I hope that I have answered all the questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Aissa, Dr. Wadia. Thank you so much for your interventions. Actually, there are several questions regarding the methodology, and there were some concerns as to the methodology, and others focused on the outcomes of the study. I will start with the outcomes of the study, and we cannot ignore them because Mr. Aissa did not continue or did not cover all the outcomes of the study, especially because of the time pressure. So I invite you all to read this paper in order to understand most of the outcomes. We can talk about the main outcomes. The first one is the distribution of the confrontation between the two groups as to the ownership of the space, and the second part is the ritual of the ultras represented by graffiti, and we are talking about one of the rituals that lead to shaping up the identity of this team, and there is some sort of symbolism with loaded with historical meanings, and presenting them in a specific way, symbolic representation of the northern parts of Morocco. And many of you know that the northern parts of Morocco have specificities, particularly when it comes to the confrontation between the rural uh, area residents and the central power. So the resistance forms in the reef since Abdul Karim Khattabi movement, etc. And the third outcome is that the graffiti of the ultras is one of the ownership tools. And Mr. Isa mentioned that this question is key and is reflected in the research, or in the fact that some groups are searching for or trying to write on top of the symbols of another group. I have a number of key questions. The first key question is the question of Mr. Haidar regarding the context of the graffiti. We did not highlight it enough, and why. The ultras and why they need the graffiti. First of all, the north of Morocco has a specificity because, as I have said, of the struggle between the center and the periphery. And the northern people are more religious, and the social cohesion is bigger until today. So the preparation, the organization, the framework, the communication, all of this is more or stronger than other parts of Morocco, and also the north of Morocco is known for resistance because they have mountainous expansions, and we know in anthropology that residents of the mountain are more introvert than the residents of urban spaces. No, we do not have enough time to answer all the questions, unfortunately. So why writings and not drawings? At the level of the field research, we noticed there are numbers, symbols, writings, slogans, colors, paintings, so it was difficult for us to talk about drawings, so we talked about the concept of writings because it was more comprehensive. Mr. Musa talked about the necessity of a repertoire of actions. If you go back to the paper, we can talk about concepts, tagging, ownership, sphere, identity. These are the main concepts, as I have explained. The theoretical aspects that shaped our concepts. Mr. Hisham Kamouni talked about the book of Ahmad Sharrak. We are not talking about graffiti itself, we are talking about graffiti in light of its contribution in making a specific movement used as a tag and ownership of a specific location, and one of the tools even up to the resistance of authority and other movements. Mr. Amara talked about a very important idea, which is the idea to move from ultras to the rap. The movement from ultras to the rap is recent compared to the movement to the digital sphere, because ultras in the Arab world and Morocco and the Maghreb and the northern parts of Africa did not know the strength before the social internet in 2005 and its rise of social media. So the activists became very strong activists on social media platforms, and we have several studies, especially as to the use of ultras during the Arab Spring in Egypt, Tunisia, and other Arab countries. Sorry, unfortunately, we are way out of time. One question by Mr. Islam Haid. Can we actually talk about it as a social movement? John McCarthy defined it as more comprehensive, more complex movement than the protest. So it is more comprehensive with several extensions. So James Scott theory was mentioned and other theories. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wadia. You focused on the specificity of North Morocco. Indeed, the North has specificity, and it would be good to expand the research in the future to include the Tangier ultras in order to study it in more details. Thank you, Dr. Wadia Jehouani. Thank you, Mr. Aissa Ghayyati, and thank you, Mr. Ali Semmouk and Mr. Hichem Saouli. Thank you for being with us. We are late a lot. This is why 1 hour lunch break, and then we will continue at 2:15. Thank you.